Welcome back to this new lecture on SQL for Data Science tutorial for absolute beginners. This video is a continuation in the ongoing SQL tutorial playlist where I am covering all the topics in SQL starting from basics to advanced level. So if you are someone who is new to SQL, I highly suggest that instead of watching the videos randomly, you follow this playlist in a sequence manner for an efficient learning. Without any further delay, let's have a quick look on today's agenda. If you are someone who works as a SQL analyst, then there will be a frequent usage of whereby clause. By the end of this lecture, you will have a complete understanding that why and how do we use it. Let's cover the theory first. So group by actually helps us to aggregate data and then apply functions on the categories on which the aggregation has happened. Functions like min, max, distinct, etc. that we have already covered within this playlist. The group by function allows you to apply the same kind of function on aggregated data. The idea will be more clear if we try to understand this by an example. So I'm using this made up data by me. Over here we have a table where we have three different columns: name, gender and age. And let's say I'm interested to calculate the average age within this column. So we already know that how do we use the average function in order to get this information. And this is the average age in this entire table. But let's say this time I want to know the average age for each category within this gender column, which is male and female. And this is where group by clause comes into the picture. Group by clause allows us to use an aggregate function in order to get this kind of outcomes. So over here we have the average age for each category within the gender column respectively. Let's go ahead and jump into our PG admin to understand this on the data from our DVD rental database. So far you are already familiar with this payment table from our DVD rental database, which has these many columns. And we know very well that if we want to calculate the average, sum, min or maximum value from this amount column, then how to go about it. But what if I want to see the sum of amount not for the entire table but for each customer ID respectively? In that case, let's go ahead and see how group by clause helps us with that. So this will be the correct syntax in order to get the desired outcome. Pay attention, over here I am selecting the customer ID by which I want to see this aggregated result from the payment table and group by customer ID. Make sure that the column you are using in the group by clause, it has to be there in the select statement as well. Otherwise you might see an error. If I select this and hit execute, we will get the desired outcome. So for each customer ID, I can see the sum of amount. Now let's say I want to order this outcome with this sum of amount column. In that case, we need to add over here in the query order by and then not amount. This is what we tend to do, but this will give you an error. Why? Because over here this column is not amount. This column is sum of amount. So if you try to order by the result only by amount, you will get an error. So this is why we have to use the sum of amount in the order by clause. And then, as you know, by default the order by works in ascending order. If you select this query and hit execute, you will get the same result but this time in ascending order. In case you want to see it in descending order, you know how to go about it. Select and execute and you see the same outcome but this time in descending order. Let's say that instead of sum of amount, we are interested to know the number of transactions made by each customer ID. All we need to do is, instead of sum, we need to use the count of amount. It will give us the count of transaction against each customer ID. And you make sure that you change this here as well. In case you want to see the outcome in descending order, leave it as it is, or you can simply remove it as well. Select and hit execute. And this time we can see the number of transactions made by each customer ID. And this is how we simply use the group by clause and then apply a function on the aggregated data, as we are aggregating the data by customer ID over here in this example. Let's have couple of more examples. So like last time, we tried to fetch the sum of amount or the number of transaction aggregated by the customer ID. But let's say that this time we want to see the result aggregated by this staff ID column. So let's go ahead and see that how do we check the number of transactions made through each staff ID. So this will be the correct syntax to do it. I'm using this staff ID column and count of transaction, which is count of amount made by each staff ID. And I'm using this staff ID column over here with this group by clause as well. All we need to do is select and hit execute. And we can see the number of transactions made against each staff ID. Let's see a last example in this lecture. So over here, I'm selecting this customer ID, sum of amount with respect to each customer ID from the payment table, group by customer ID, and then order by this sum of amount, and I'm displaying the output in descending order. And then I'm choosing the top 5 records. If I select and hit execute, this is what I get. So this is the sum of amount against each customer ID, and the result contain only the top 5 records. So I hope the idea on using the group by clause is quite clear to you, but only watching the tutorial videos is not going to be helpful enough. So I highly suggest that you practice your learnings on your computer system, on your PG admin, to enhance your SQL skills. I hope you found this lecture helpful. If yes, please consider supporting the channel by dropping a like below and hitting the subscribe button. If you have any suggestions for me, if you want me to make any kind of changes with my way of teaching, please feel free to drop a feedback in the comment section, and I'll make sure that I improvise myself accordingly. Thank you very much for your time. See you in the next lecture.